yeah, it'll be fine. Don't worry about it. It's all good. And then you lay awake and say, it's not going to be fine. That's not right. Hey, this is Davin with Hagerty on our Redline rebuild updates. Today I'm moving on to the brakes. Last time we finished up the hub assemblies, so they are ready to go on to the spindles. But before we get too far, we have to get our brakes done so we can put those on first. So I've already went through and tore down 3 out of the 4 setups. They are basically the same. They're drum brakes on the front, drum brakes on the rear. Yeah, that could be a little sketchy, but hey, that's the way it was done. And because the back end is slightly different than the front end as far as how they attach to the axle versus the spindles, the backing plates are different, but fundamentally and shoe size, they're exactly the same. So you have, simply put, you have your self-adjusting wheel here, you have your master or your brake cylinder here, springs hold everything together, and then obviously the shoes. Now, something you'll notice that's a little bit different than your common everyday driving vehicle that has drum brakes is one of the things that would occur in a race car is you would possibly modify the shoes. And you will see that there's a big chunk cut out of these. It is very purposeful. And the point would be, in a race car that's going around corners, when you hit the brakes, you actually want it to float to the left. So you will change the braking ability on all 4 corners potentially. If your rules do not allow you to change that hydraulically or limit the amount of brake pressure going to a corner, then you had to go through and do something a little more creative like this, where they cut out sections of the brakes. So basically it just doesn't have as much braking surface. So for instance, your right front corner won't brake quite as hard as your left front corner, and then likewise for the rears. So I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to get there. I could do exactly the same thing or something similar as far as changing that amount. I've done that before on my personal stuff. And, well, hold it, unless the tech inspector's listening, and then I didn't. But the other way is to put some limiting functions, and I just haven't figured out exactly what I want to do. We're trying to stay somewhat period correct, but simple shutoff valves and some things like that have always been around, so it's not a big deal, we'll say. One of the things I will be addressing is in the brake system. I'm not real fond of a single reservoir master cylinder, so I will put a dual reservoir of some fashion. I don't know if I'll have a single length reservoir with 2 partitions in it, or do 2 separate master cylinders, which is another tuning function as well, because you can get those in 2 different bore sizes, so you put less pressure or more pressure. Now, one of the things that we want to go kind of roll back here, keep in mind that when these cars were built back in the day, you were going through your own personal salvage yard potentially, or the local pull apart type of thing, and you were looking around for whatever you could use that was on the cheap. So don't get excited when this doesn't look like what you have, because, well, it's been modified, likewise with this one. And it's being modified to serve a function. So with that, my process here today is I'm going to go through and finish tearing this one apart, and then I'm going to go through and get everything painted up and then start reassembling. And here's my Rock Auto tip of the day. Before you tear the last one of these apart, grab your cell phone, take a picture. Because you will get to the point where all your parts are out on the table, and you'll be standing there scratching your head going, geez, which shoe is in the front, which shoe is in the back, because they are different. There's a primary and a secondary. And then, of course, where do the springs go? That's my tip. With having these out on the bench now, it makes them really nice to work on because I can see them. I'm not kind of standing on my head and all that jazz. But you also lose all your leverage when it comes to pulling things apart. So it's nice that this is a nice sub-assembly. I can take it over, I can put it in the vise, I can do whatever I want. But one of the things I'm going to do here is I'm going to use some vice grips. If I pull this spring off, get the adjuster out of there, this will actually should peel up this way and be able to kind of take these springs apart a little easier, but we'll see how it works. Ta-da! Look at that. I still have all my fingers. Fantastic. Well, that was easy. So now we're going to replace these. Right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to replace these springs. Since I don't know what these are to go find year, make, and model, I have to match everything up. But I got some friends in some good spots. They might be able to help me out matching these up. And if not, they're not in horrible shape. I'll just clean them, put a little spritz of paint on them, and call it good. We will need to reuse the little ends here out of the wheel cylinders, so we'll clean them up in the sandblast cabinet or the vapor hone and get those nice and clean and shiny. And then I already have some new wheel cylinders here we picked up from Rock Auto. We can get those cleaned up, or take these out, throw them away, and put the fresh ones in there. So that'll be good. But first and foremost, let's get this out of here. And of course I didn't grab the right wrench. All right, on to the vapor home. I'm going to knock some of this nastiness off, and then we're going to shoot a coat of paint on it.
What nastiness?
Yeah, just this little crumb here and crumb here, and I'll smooth this off. Just with a little polishing wheel.
So the paint stays better.
Nah, more so the pads, so the shoes slide back and forth there with no issues. You can see it's kind of beat up a little bit. Okay, well here we are. Well, all of our stuff is painted up and looking nice and pretty now. So at this point I'm going to go through and start reassembling things. Now, again, go back and reference that picture you took. But at the same time, there's a few things to note. So brake shoes, as a for instance, there are primary and secondary shoes. So if you look, these are different. The shoe here is long, this shoe or friction material is longer than this one. The short one is your primary and goes to the front of the vehicle, and your longer shoe is the trailing or the secondary shoe, which goes on the back side. Now, since my brakes are all symmetric relative to, as you can see, like these two halves are exactly the same, that's what I mean. One of the things I'm going to do, so I don't have to rethink this as I go back and put everything on, I'm actually going to mark on here which one goes to which corner, because I want to make sure I have it set up already so my shoe is in the right position. And then likewise on the adjusters, when this was set up, it had exactly the same adjuster on all corners. Now I'm going to actually put a left on the left and a right on the right, opposed to rights on all of them. And that will really just make it symmetric relative to when you're going through and you adjust this particular car. You'll have to hand adjust them, so it'll always be up or always be down as far as tightening that shoe. Now, if you're doing your daily driver, you don't have to worry about that as much, because every time you back up, that self-adjuster adjusts the brakes. So that's how that works. At this point, I guess start just throwing it together. And put this one on the, it's gonna be left rear, right front, left front. This is pretty obvious, but right rear. Okay, so here's my left rear brake assembly. Here's what I've determined it will be my left rear hub assembly, and for safe storage, I'm gonna leave it right here. Good spot for it to be until I'm ready for it. Well, all right, so I don't know about you guys, but have you ever had that project as you're working on it and things aren't quite fitting right, but you try to convince yourself, yeah, it'll be fine, don't worry about it, it's all good. And then you lay awake and say, it's not gonna be fine, that's not right. Well, here's the situation. So we put together a couple of these assemblies for the brakes on the car, and I was like, I just don't like it. It doesn't, this angle here doesn't look right. And when I go to put the shoe in to here, the shoes don't match up very well with the arc. Here, we can hold it like that. In fact, they don't match up at all with the arc. So in the meantime here, I've went through every set of 12-inch diameter, 2.5 wide brake shoes that I can possibly get my hands on, set them in there. I've had some where the arc is right, and I've had some where the arc is wrong, and I've had them where the backer is not in the right position, doing this, and where this stuff doesn't work. Basically a complete mismatch every time. So what it amounted to, I had to rethink the wheel here, and I took my original shoes that fit perfectly, by the way, and sent the backers out and had them relined. So now that they're back and relined, you can see they fit in here perfectly. So thanks to Scott down at Brake Materials and Parts down in Fort Wayne, Indiana, I have relined shoes, and as you notice, they're specific to each drum. Now, part of my mismatch, of course, is the drums are a little bit oversized, but you can see that he's set them up. So this is only for the right rear, this is only for the left rear, and of course there's a mate, likewise for the other two corners. So we are back in business relative to the shoes, and we're gonna take these and out. Last thing, I kept looking at this adjuster, knowing what was in it was this, but couldn't locate these. And Scott pointed me in the right direction there as well. These are, the fine tooth are for self-adjusters, so they would have a little arm in there and they would self-adjust when you back up. And I think I mentioned that earlier, that these are not. These are manual adjusting. But the manual adjusting has to have this larger tooth. And the idea is that will grab this spring, gives it another spot for it to be, and that spring is supposed to ride on that. That keeps it from adjusting or just willy-nilly moving. So we're gonna tear these apart, redo them, and then we'll be done. Oh, wow, that looks so much nicer. All right, so now like I mentioned with these other backers, you can see my rods from my brake cylinders are now straight. They're not going at some weird angle. So that's a lot better. Oh. What I need to do is modify it a little bit more. And there's our brake assemblies. We're all done. Next step, we'll be putting them on the car and then doing the last minute adjustment, of course, relative to their individual hubs. But one thing I want to make note of, yes, we do read the comments, and yes, I do look through them, and I comment back and forth on occasion on some things. But one thing I'd like to call out, and I really appreciate the input, is you guys that got out there and are after your projects now. That's fantastic. So Mustang 2, good on you for getting after that Mustang. And for twisting terrain, I'm really curious to see how that Cadillac comes along, because with your username in a Cadillac is not really jiving together. But hey, more power to you. And for the rest of you that have projects in your shop and you're struggling like I do to get back to them and get after them, I got a convertible that my wife's killing me over because it's been way too many years. But that's a whole nother topic. But hey, shoot them in the comments. Like I said, we read them. Until then, get in the shop, get your work done, get after it. We'll see ya. I'm out of here.